Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar titled Creating a Positive Safety Culture in Trucking. I am TCA's Senior Director of Education, and on behalf of TCA's entire leadership team, I want to thank you for joining us. I would also like to express our sincere appreciation to Netradyne for their generosity in leading and sponsoring today's webinar. A few reminders before we get started. Should you become disconnected from today's event, you may rejoin by clicking the link provided in your registration and reminder emails. A disclaimer will be posted in the chat window for today's session. Today's session is being recorded. Questions can be submitted using the Q&A or chat icon found at the bottom of your screen. We will acknowledge your question once it has been submitted. Today's speakers are Adam Lang, Director, Customer Advisory Services with Netradyne; Adam Kahn, Chief Business Development Officer with Netradyne; Matt Hefflefinger, Esquire with Chartwell Law; and Raul Soria, Director of Safety with Hill Brothers Transportation. It is now my pleasure to hand the conversation over to Adam Kahn.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the webinar. It is our pleasure to spend some time with you. By design, I've invited a couple friends along with me, Adam Lang, Matt, and Raul, and I'll let them say hello here in a second. I know that the four of us, as we talked about this, we really wanted to provide material that might incite some change or offer some best practices for your teams to incorporate. It is not intended to be a commercial or a sales pitch. If you are interested at the end of learning more about Netradyne, please reach out to either Adam Lang or myself, and we'd be glad to share some information and answer questions. But with that, I do want to kind of go around the table here and let everyone say hello. Adam, I'll let you go first and introduce yourself, and then pass the baton to Matt or Raul.
Hi, everyone. Adam Lang with Netradyne, Director of Customer Advisory Services. I have the privilege of working with many of our customers on usage of the system. Discussion of best practices is one of my favorite things when it comes to speaking with our customers and our prospects, and just seeing all the impressive fleets out there that are evolving and changing and bringing themselves into today's world of safety. Appreciate it. Matt, would you love to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Adam. I'm Matt Hefflefinger. I'm a partner with Chartwell Law. I've been doing this law gig for about 35 years now, which is hard to believe, but I do a lot of trucking litigation throughout the Midwest.
Thank you. Raul.
Raul, I'm going to advance the slide, and as you introduce yourself, maybe along with introducing yourself, and if all the attendees can look over Raul's left shoulder, there's a whole shelf full of safety awards. And so we're really privileged to have Raul and Hill Brothers on the call with us, because the first three of us, we practice and we support, but Raul and Hill Brothers, they're in the thick of it, and they're getting it done. So I'm going to advance the slide, Raul, and maybe peacock a little bit and share it with everyone what the results that your team is having, and what your history and your experience has been.
Sure, thanks, Adam, and thank you for allowing me on this event today and to share our journey. My name is Raul Soria. I'm with Hill Brothers Transportation. This is my 20th year with my company. I'm honored to have served here in different capacities, but currently in the role of safety. We're primarily a dry van and refrigerated carrier in Nebraska. We're operating around 230 trucks. We're responsible currently for all things safety, right? Technology, driver hiring, training, onboarding. So they've invited me on here to kind of just share a little bit about our journey and some of our successes over the last few years. We've seen a lot of improvement in different areas that have kind of put us where we're at today. And we have a lot of teams to thank. This wasn't just a safety effort, but this was the whole organization as a whole really banded together to achieve some of these different improve performance metrics. So safety performance is a constant topic amongst all of our team members, anywhere from fleet managers to technicians to drivers to safety staff, recruiting. Our whole primary purpose is just to create awareness for everyone, engage others, and hopefully equally get them to be as passionate about safety. Hopefully to not take any shortcuts, whether it's a pre-trip inspection, trip planning, getting out and looking as they're backing, any of those tasks that can get rushed over time. Speaking of rushing, anything like speeding or following distance. So just to inspire them to want to do the right thing, because their safety matters and everyone's safety out on the roadways matters as well.
Yeah, Raul, I know you jumped over it because sometimes, to pat yourself on the back and your team's back. But, I was at the recent TCA event, which is great. One of the best events that I attend all year. And I had a little sense of pride having your team up on stage with another trophy in the safety contest. Do you want to maybe chat a little bit about the experience of how you pulled that information together and what elements you thought, maybe pushed you over the edge?
Sure. So we've done a lot of hard work over the years to just focus on getting better. We're fortunate we were just awarded second place in our division. This is the third year that we've been awarded second place for this division for the fleet safety contest. So prior to that, 2018, 21, and most recently 2023. So we're really proud of that. But like I mentioned, it was just a team effort. We really banded together over the last few years to work amongst all the different departments. This wasn't just safety and the safety team. This was our operations staff had a real big portion of contributing to our success with just pitching in, rolling up their sleeves and having the tough conversations and helping us with some of the driver coaching and any project plans that we had, aiding us to be able to complete those successfully over time. And that showed just for this award was it's all accident performance, DOT frequency. So we really had a good year this last year in minimizing our exposure and our on-road crashes that were DOT recordable.
That's fantastic. One of the things that I'm going to notice on here that I think is really an interesting piece, and Matt, we're going to maybe go to the next slide here and kind of talk about macro issues, but I think this is a good pivot. I see at the bottom of the slide here, Camera Tech adopted 2020, which has a nice alignment with some of the CSA score improvements. Obviously you deploy a new system, you let it run a little bit, you get the kinks out, you remove some of the bugs, you find the ebb and flow of the program, and then you get the results that you want. But the piece, Matt, that I think will be interesting to have you join the conversation, where it talks about virtual coaching first, and then within a year added human element to coaching. And as we talk about, the macro environment that fleets are kind of focusing on, one of the pieces that that I know that you are very tuned to is the strategies of plaintiff attorneys, what they look for in terms of gaps in coverage. And what speaks to me is a little bit is Hill Brothers' purposeful attention to talk with their drivers, on a weekly basis and kind of increase that frequency. And I know that we've talked about like why that matters in a courtroom, in terms of, kind of mitigating some litigation. So maybe you can step in and share why that's valuable, or, what your experience has seen in terms of increased engagement with drivers and what that means in pre-trial or trial environments.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. There are studies that speak to the importance of basically having what I'll call happy drivers, if you will. Many drivers during the course of their career become increasingly unhappy just because they're driving a truck. Their title was a truck driver when they started. Their title remains a truck driver. And I think that's a little problematic. So I think it's important that, a company like Hill Brothers, having those touch points, those contacts with drivers is just so important to keep them, feeling like they're a member of the team, doing whatever you need to do to keep them being a member of a team. Because the other thing too, when something may come to me, if there's an accident, that driver may be, employed by ABC or XYZ trucking company, but in 2 years down the road, they may be gone. And so the point is, you know, you want them to feel good about the trucking company that they work for at the time of the accident, which is going to result in a lot of good things down the road in terms of how they communicate, how they are willing to prepare for depositions, because it takes a lot of work to prepare a truck driver to testify relative to the issues that exist way beyond just the accident itself, but all the you know, their background being explored, which they get many times very sensitive about, as well as, you know, dealing with the reptile.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, because I think that you know, there's a lot of macro pieces that I know, Raul, that your team is looking at. I just saw an article the other day about the increase in staged accidents. And, you know, that just speaks to, you know, having a third witness, or a third, you know, the justification for video. And in addition to that, I think that the appetite of insurance companies right now is they sure encourage video over not, because they're starting to see some of the benefits. Raul, maybe can you talk to like the specific elements, maybe one or two situations where you might see a staged accident, or, you know, the conversation with drivers about removing some risk, you know, how did that go? And then from there, I want to really pivot to the retention piece, because I think that's the essence of this conversation we're going to have today in terms of the positive interactions. But maybe we can start with kind of looking at, you know, some of the, maybe you got a favorite story or unfavorite story about how video maybe got the team out of a jam because of a staged accident, or the appetite for the drivers and what it took to get them to onboard.
Sure, sure. So we're pretty fortunate. We don't go to any of these high hazard areas where you do hear of these staged accidents, but we do have the technology now to be able to better defend ourselves versus not having a technology in place. So protecting ourselves is the first stage, but then maybe sharing that awareness with drivers that if you are ever in an area where a bigger city, a metropolitan area, be at risk, or be aware that these types of things can happen, and we're here to help you. That's why we can enable the camera. They can send us panic alerts. They can do any of those types of things that we share with them to do if they feel that somebody's trying to, say, pull out in front of them and brake check them to trigger a rear end collision. So we haven't really had any firsthand staged accidents, but we do have a recent success story in which we were traveling in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We were rear-ended by another semi, which forced us to rear-end the car in front of us. Had we not had the technology, that could have easily turned into we were the at-fault party that caused the rear-end collision. So having that video technology to better defend and exonerate us when we are involved in accidents really helps us be successful.
That's great. So the other piece that I was thinking about on this slide here was the driver retention piece. And, you know, I know that, you know, you're in the trenches working with drivers every day. You know, Adam has had a lot of experience there. You know, I've been fortunate to talk to drivers in the past. Talk to me a little bit about, I know one of the elements that we strive to do with our solution is kind of maybe advocate for the driver versus find ways to yell at the driver. Can you talk about how you know, having full access to all the data, which gives you not only the bad but the good, has kind of maybe changed your, you know, the way that your team, you know, onboards and works with drivers every day?
Sure. So from a driver acceptance or retention standpoint, they really embraced the technology. They welcomed it. They were thankful that the company was investing in them to better not only share some of the performance, but better defend them when they know they're not, when they're doing everything right, when the motoring public is driving reckless or egregious and causing those near misses. So having those cameras now being able to kind of point those out and show that the driver did an excellent job in crash mitigation or trying to avoid that collision in the first place. You know, they often will call our office and, hey, check out this, you know, check out this event where a car cut me off. And really that's a good opportunity for us to pat them on the back and just thank them for what they do every single day.
Yeah, it feels like, Adam Lang, I'm going to maybe let you share a little bit here. It feels like that could be a very viral thing. You know, as much as we all want to like come down from the podium and speak to a group of drivers and tell them what to do, it feels like that event that might have happened that the driver was covered, right? You had their back. You know, Adam Lang, in your experience, you know, prior to Netradyne, you know, how impactful that is that? And then Matt, I want to ask you the follow-up question of like, how does that manifest in court? You know, in terms of you know, painting the story or telling the story about the environment. So maybe Adam, if you can share a little bit about how that might resonate, or how you felt like that accelerated, you know, things that you've tried to do.
Well, first off, when the company I worked with got cameras, it was 2018, and really what initiated it, we'd been talking about it for around a year, but in January of 2018, we were involved in a multi-vehicle collision where one of the vehicles had 7 passengers in it. And this was just a standard vehicle. So you can imagine not everyone was wearing their seatbelt, not everyone was safe that day. And it was I remember it was a super cold out. It was about -20, just air temperature. The roads were slippery. Our driver happened to have personal Cobra dash cam that he had purchased with points from a truck stop, just to protect himself. And I was aware of it. He's like, look at this camera I'm putting in my truck. I said, great move. That footage, the limited footage that we got, helped exonerate us and tell the driver's story 100% the way it happened. And within 2 weeks, we were on the path to trialing commercial cameras, just not off the shelf cameras like this driver had, which served its purpose, but something that offered a little bit more. Every moment of exoneration in the beginning stages, we would share with our fleet. We would tell the story, and we also had TVs around our different terminals that we would show footage where these cameras saved the driver. They exonerated the company. And that in of itself got the buy-in. That became the new water cooler. And you know, if you want to take that and use that at your fleet, TVs are cheap. LCD TVs are really cheap, or LED TVs now. Put a few up in your terminal. Run some footage, you know, footage of exoneration, footage of drivers doing the right thing, avoiding things, or triggering positive alerts. And it helps get the drivers to buy into it just by seeing it and demystifying the camera. When you see the alert, you see what it looks like. It takes some of that mystery out, and it also shows how you're in the same boat. You're rowing the boat together. You all want the same thing, to move freight, to make money. Well, this is the best way to do that while keeping the folks that are looking to make a quick buck off of trucking companies at bay.
Yeah, it's interesting. Thank you, Adam. And Matt, I want to transition here, because not only I'm going to walk right into your wheelhouse, and I think the good transition there was we've talked previously, and I'm going to just review the conversation. We've talked previously about the impact of being able to demonstrate the driver's positive intent, and having, you know, data that shows, hey, you know, they drove this many miles and they had this many, you know, safe miles, and, you know, possibly, you know, showcase a couple scenarios where the driver did a positive maneuver to reduce risk. In that whole scheme of that conversation, how I mean, is that one of the things that, like, you would advise companies to start really trying to lean into? Or, you know, walk me through, like, is that noticed? Is it not noticed? I think it's noticed, but maybe you can help describe, like, how that's presented and why that's important.
Here's what I would say is, you know, Hill Brothers would be, you know, kind of the dream client that you want to represent, Adam, because you see you know, I see the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so you want to see companies like Hill Brothers have that you know, very active, alive safety culture where you can create the narrative that you want to create in front of the jury. It's very hard to create a narrative, a good narrative for a company that basically has a driver manual and then doesn't really engage in the necessary action to, implement things to make safety a part of their culture. There's other situations I've been in where you have the safety department unto itself, and they're just kind of out there, and you can just sense they're not probably getting the support they need, and the jury has a tendency to sense that. So in terms of getting back to like what Adam talked about, I mean, we might not be able to get in those other instances, but what we can clearly get in at trial is having an active, alive safety culture, and that's a type of thing that's going to minimize the possibility of a nuclear verdict. The ATRI study that came out a few years ago on nuclear verdicts talked about seeing the average nuclear verdict in 2000, or average verdict in 2010 somewhere around $2.5 million, and it went to 22.3 million in 2018. So we've seen this massive escalation in a very short period of time. A lot of that comes back to jurors being upset with the motor carrier. So to me, we need to minimize that as much as we can, and that the Hill brothers and the Raul story is a perfect example of what needs to be done out there.
It's interesting, and I just wrote this down, and I don't know, Adam Lang, if you caught this also, but you just made the statement of active, alive safety culture, and then previous to that, you talked about a safety manual. I don't think there's a document that I've received over the last 6 months in working with my colleagues at Netradyne that not presented as an active link. Like a standard PDF is almost a dinosaur in terms of sharing information because it's static. And I do know that you and I have spoken about this, and maybe you can share more about this, that, what does it mean to be an active, alive safety culture as it contradicts with, I call it a published safety manual, and maybe you can share some observations, best practices, or lessons learned around that in terms
Absolutely.
of court assisting in getting out of court or winning in court.
So it's all about kind of putting your money where your mouth is, and you can have a really vibrant, ever changing, ever evolving positive culture at your fleet, but it's important to have what I would call your standardized living, breathing documentation for how you do things, ways to document your processes and your systems, your safety program. You need to have documentation in place, but it does not need to be a gigantic manual that covers every eventuality and is all comprehensive and all knowing. There is no document like that exists, save for maybe an engineering manual on a piece of equipment, right? But
Right.
we're talking about how you actually implement your processes and your programs and mitigate risk and keep people safe. And you cannot just write up a policy, set it, and forget about it. Things change and priorities change. We experienced one of the defining moments of our generation just over 4 years ago when we experienced a global pandemic. So things changed during the pandemic on how we recruited, how we onboarded folks and kept folks safe, and where people worked, and social distancing, and blah, 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 all that stuff. We had to adapt and evolve. The same goes for your processes and your procedures. And one of the final steps that folks will say in any good safety program is reevaluation and changing, periodic reevaluation of your priorities, of your practices, and just the laws in general, the things that have been put in place in trucking and in safety technology. You need to update it, and you need to keep tabs on it and have
Yeah.
folks within the team doing that.
Yeah, let me include Raul on this, and then Matt, I want you to kind of comment. So I know Adam and Raul have fleet experience, and then I want maybe you to take Raul's feedback and then say comment on how it might manifest in court. Raul, in terms of the safety procedures that you have, how often do you think about, how do you document those? How do you communicate those? How fluid are they? Or, is that by design that, that you want to kind of keep it loose, but, but focused? Maybe walk us through about, how you think about the framework of your culture.
Sure, sure. No, so I totally agree with Adam that that you have to be willing to try new things, right, to get a different result, and continue to evolve your safety program over time, and just try new ways of achieving that more efficient, different tools, different technology. You constantly have to be able to try those new things, and not just have the same safety culture that's been there with no new improvements or changes. I think that's one of the things our company does well is we're not afraid of change. We're constantly changing things, not getting used to any one process. But to answer your question, as far as for documentation, I think any policy that you put in place, you definitely have to adhere to that, or that could later be used against you. So whatever you do put in place, make sure you're consistent and that you follow up on those policies and procedures, and hold yourselves accountable. Otherwise, in the wrong hands, this information will definitely be used against you.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question for you, Raul, and then Matt, I want to pass it over to you to kind of comment on both Adam and Raul's statement. Raul, when you kind of revisit you kind of evaluate what's working, what's not working. How much are you involving? I call it I call it driver captains or driver leads, or is that how do you solicit feedback, from the team, make them feel like it's, they're engaged in it's collaborative?
I think it starts with just having an open door policy where drivers can just reach out to you at any time. Every driver in my fleet has my cell phone number, and they're not afraid to reach out. That's actually the best form of communication for me, just because I'm not always at this desk. I'm not always here to answer this office phone. So if they have a concern, or they have a question, or they have a recommendation for how we can get better, how we can make their job better, I want them to be able to call. And if it's nights, weekends, holidays, it doesn't matter. I really want to hear what they have to say, and I want to keep that open dialogue available to them. I think outside of that, just being willing to stay active in the industry to kind of learn what's out there, what other fleets are doing. So we're all kind of in this together. We're all facing the same challenges, and we all kind of stick together and kind of lean on each other. And hopefully we're all getting better and performing as much safer industry than we had in years prior.
Oh, that's awesome. Hey, so Matt, hearing what Adam said and what Raul said, I know you're already chomping at the bit to have Hill Brothers as a client, but has he helped his cause here? Or, so tell me about like how I know you're pretty passionate about not being static on documentation, but hearing from Adam and Raul, what's your commentary, or are you have something to add? Is it, are they spot on? Is it, a little bit of corrective action, or where do you I'd love to hear your opinion here.
No, I think it's exciting to hear these sorts of discussions. I mean, obviously, I knew Adam before he joined Netradyne, and I know that the type of job he did, and he was a very, very proactive leader in managing risk, and I think it's extremely important. I think we have to be mindful of this. Is that why are truck drivers many times? Because they like the freedom, they like the independence, they like being in the open road. So relying upon a quote unquote driver manual as your, with all your rules, and then not doing any, I don't really like a driver manual. I like action. Drivers are going to understand action. They're going to understand the feeling of a culture. They're going to respond to that. They're not going to respond to a piece of paper or, 85 pages of a driver manual. It just doesn't fly. And even when you prepare them to testify, they really don't even like to read the stuff. They just, it's like they're not comfortable with it. They will relate well to, the phone call is breath by rule. Let's face it. I mean, trucking was probably the first remote work environment that, well before COVID, right? So those touch points with someone like Raul and others at Hill Brothers are extremely important to make those people feel that they're part of the family. And then when I come into the mix, I want to extend that, because I'm obviously going to represent, say, Hill Brothers and their driver, and so that's a very important part of the process, is that I'm kind of a natural extension of what they already are about as a company and their culture. And that also speaks to the importance of a lawyer, making sure that lawyer really knows his client well, to be able to do a really effective job.
Yeah, that's great. I think there's, we've kind of hit on two key takeaways. One is, the drivers are, well, the main topic would be that the drivers are integral to your safety culture. One is by collaborating with them. And then the second one is ensuring that you highlight, their success, because I think both have great different narratives that reinforce the great work that good safety cultures are performing. It's interesting when we talk about like the levels of risk, and how you might engage drivers. So there's a couple different ways. And Raul, I'm going to just walk through this, and then I'm going to maybe pick your brain on how you utilize the virtual coaching. Like I was just at a conference the other day, and I was talking about the Hawthorne effect, and I was describing that if you put a camera in your vehicle for the first 2 days, no matter if there was a bug that flew on your nose, there was no way you're touching your face, because you just tend to believe everyone's looking at you, and you're probably at your best driving. But that wanes off without some type of I call it program that continues to ask you to slow down, put your phone down, to reinforce good habits. I think one of the pieces on here that Hill Brothers has done very nicely over the last 4 years is, one, you start off with virtual coaching, which means that drivers had a mobile app, and they sat down and they reviewed material, not in front of a coach. And then you've also included manual coaching. So maybe, Raul, you can talk through, like the rationale for, what box did that check, and what's the driver's feedback, and how did that evolve, and why is that method that you did, been successful for you?
Sure, sure. So no, I think this chart is definitely spot on. Just the mere presence of the technology on board some of the trucks did limit a lot of our on-road risk, right? Whether it's speeding violations, stop signs, red lights, a lot of that kind of slowed down over time. We also enabled some of the in-cab audible alerts that for the real-time in-cab alert to please slow down, or put the phone down, or distracted driving. But some of that real-time feedback helped getting everybody embrace the driver app, so they can check their own progress, self-coach themselves just on their own score. They can see right on the mobile app how they're performing, and where the areas that they need to get better. And then lastly, some virtual coaching options, showing them some videos. That was helpful. But I think more than any of these is definitely the one-on-one engagement. That is really what has set us apart, and what's really helped us, is adding that human element, a person behind the phone, somebody that they know and trust, reaching out to them, and maybe not addressing every single violation, because it's almost not feasible, but just having a weekly conversation on how are we doing this week, where are the areas where we need to perform or improve, and where are they doing great at. I think that just that feedback on a regular basis, not necessarily from an operations person who's mostly doing their pickups and deliveries, but mostly on how am I doing as a driver driving, right? Having that human element has really helped make us better.
Yeah, so I do want to do a small caveat on, so to the audience, when Raul says we don't coach on every alert, I would suggest that in the face-to-face and the remote coaching, all that's built into the coaching element. So, if you have 5 speeding alerts, all 5 speeding alerts are coached, and it's a conversation with the driver. The other piece that I think is really interesting, that I was just listening and it popped in my head, I think traditionally, when I first started in trucking, I was always really impressed with the Million Miler Club, right? And I thought that was just an awesome accomplishment. And then, as I was in the industry a little bit longer, I figured out that's about, an attaboy every 10 years. And I might be a little frustrated if I had to wait 10 years to get some accolades. And so I think the traditional way that we think about recognition and positivity is like, hey, you had a driving moment that you did something really fantastic. And I think that's really good. But as I'm listening to Raul, I actually think that there's another element, that the positive engagement with the driver is actually being transparent with the driver, and sharing information to where, hey, you're speeding right now. I'd sure like to work with you to have you slow down, or your score is this and it could have been this if you did this. And I actually might cast that as being, labeled as a positive engagement is almost as valuable as, if not more valuable than waiting 10 years for the Million Mile Club, which is, a materially impressive accomplishment. But, Raul, can you, how do you align with that statement? And how
Sure.
is
No,
that sort of, do you see like the attitudes change because of that?
no, I agree that driver recognition is important. And yes, the Million Mile Club, those programs are great, and they honor the drivers that have put in their time and their effort over 10 years or so. But that's not the only way to recognize, right? There's leaderboards you can use and compile or reconcile driver scores and create different programs to just recognize those drivers more frequently on a more frequent basis, right? Say, for instance, what we're doing is mostly a top 20 leaderboard, right? And it's just based off their camera score, and we display that, we promote that monthly. And sure, none of those drivers may or may not be part of the Million Mile Club, but we're taking the time to recognize the drivers who did a great job more frequently and on a monthly basis, and publishing that just due to their efforts and what they go through every day to get those high scores. So just another way to do that outside of
That's
Million Mile
awesome.
programs.
So, it's interesting, as you think about, I call it the program infrastructure. And I would say, when you think about, thinking about video as an assist for safety cultures, very much like, Raul, you probably have an iceberg chart like this somewhere in your office that says, here's all the things that you see, you're measuring KPIs, you're measuring accidents per million miles, but those are the tip of the iceberg where, the hard work is underneath. Adam Lang, maybe you start here and then, and kind of share about, the types of things that make those, numbers, pop, versus just, helping a strategy.
Well, one of the things that I felt was a great exercise was looking at who is actually doing the coaching. So people expected when cameras came on the scene for the safety team to do the coaching and to kind of be the ones to correct the behavior, talk to the drivers, and make sure that they were operating safely. But when that was dug into further, it was found with multiple different companies, including ones that I've worked with, that the reach them and teach them folks are usually in operations. And the folks that have the closest relationship to the drivers are typically in operations. And wouldn't it be nice if, in addition to their multiple duties, because operations folks are busy, it's a constant balancing act to run a fleet, to get some coaching in there in some of your conversations, and let the driver know that you have visibility into what they're doing and that you're proud of them when they do something well. And you can call that out in the system while talking about some of the areas where they might need to improve, like speeding or following distance. But the message delivery is more important, because people aren't going to remember what you said to them. They're going to remember how you made them feel. I've heard that several times throughout my life. I believe in it strongly. And the operations folks are going to have that connection with the driver that maybe some of us in safety are envious of, but still will try to have that positive culture with drivers. And you can, but at the end of the day, they are going to listen to operations and talk to operations more frequently. And so that's where I think one of those silver bullets is involving operations in some way with coaching your team.
Yeah, I hopefully I wasn't making anyone dizzy with the slides here, but I was watching the time and I wanted to kind of lean into, as we step into the Q&A portion, I think the piece that I want to draw upon what you just said, Adam, about it's not what you say, it's how you make them feel. I know that our team, we recently just expanded what we call a driver star. And a driver star is not anything I call it's a fantastic alert, but it's just recording great work and then being able to enable that to fleets to be able to use that as a tool. And then Matt, to your wheelhouse, to be able to paint the picture of positivity and success and engagement. But the two types of events that we help fleets with is one is, I call it a situational event, where you're driving along, a vehicle cuts you off, and the driver takes an immediate action to improve the space, the cushion between that vehicle and the vehicle they're driving. It seems pretty nominal, but it's a very material event because it demonstrates that they're engaged. They're engaged in the program, in the teachings, and the execution. And then the other one that we just expanded, which I'm really, really happy with, is, I think from a safety technologist standpoint, and all four of us on the webinar here are safety technologists. We're also transportation technologists and driver advocates. But from a safety technologist standpoint, there is, if everyone's familiar, and I'm sure you've seen it, is the Heinrich triangle. And the element that the core element of that study says reduce unsafe acts, right? So to some degree, Raul, like you might tell a driver, hey, we want to have 50% less stop signs. Last month you had 2. I want you to have a 50% improvement. To some degree, you're saying it's okay to have 1, right? But that's not what you're saying. What you're actually saying is like strive to be great. And I think the other driver star that we just put out really captures, I call it consecutive behavior, consecutive full stops, consecutive minutes of driving well, not being distracted, or consecutive minutes of having good following distance or speed compliance. Because actually, I think that starts to change the triangle to maybe a different shape that says, I'm encouraging you to do more safe acts. And Matt, maybe I want to have you comment on that. Like, would that be considered a silver bullet to some degree, like where you can start to really demonstrate situational and then longevity, safety and positivity?
Absolutely. Let's use the data from you guys, and it was an ice cube, or what it was a glacier, that slide that had the green zone, Adam. And the importance of having that data. Okay. So when I come into the picture, one of the things I'm obviously doing is I'm gathering as much information as I can, documents upon documents, telematic information, all these sorts of things that create the picture, if you will, of what really happened in the accident. Many times, we have to work with someone like Raul, trying to make sure we understand exactly what the data is. Number one, the other thing is making sure we have all the potential data, and then starting to develop our narrative. What's our story? And as we start peeling things back, because the other thing too, many times I come in, Adam, in a motor carrier might not necessarily be entirely sophisticated with litigation, right? And certainly a truck driver many times isn't. So so we have to talk, and I can't assume that I'm going to get everything from Raul or anyone else for that matter. We have to talk, and we have to start digging, and peeling back the onion, so to speak. And then we get into, say, the documents that speak to the green zone, okay, using that again for an example, and what that potentially means, and how we can then weave that into our narrative And all that stuff is extremely important, because the thing about it is no matter how good or safe, safety conscious the motor carrier is, we're going to see situations where we may have a little few hiccups in our story, if you will, relative to certain things that may have been not necessarily documented properly or things like that. So we have to figure out how we handle all that. But you know, when a driver is under attack, so to speak, for something that happened in one particular incident, but they had a really good driving history, their green zone scores are really good. I mean, these are things that we can really use to our advantage in defending a case.
So in summary, and again, I'm not, I saw there was a small post with the TCA. The four of us are not advocating, and please don't use anything we say as confirmed legal advice. You know, obviously, if you want to chat with Matt offline, he'd love to have the conversation with you. And most certainly Raul or Adam and I can suggest best practices. But in summary of that, Matt, and then I want to probably shift over, because I'm just looking at the time to some Q&A. What, you know, if you were to come up with like a 2 or 3 or maybe 4 bullet point checkbox for, like, you visit a company, you're going to go visit Raul, right? You know, Raul, I'm sure that there'll be a sales call here, because I think that Matt's lining up to try to get you guys as a client, but hopefully in the good and not the reactive. But what are the, you know, the like 3 or 4 check boxes that, like, man, you know, I'm interviewing my new client and they say these things, and now, you know, I'm walking out of there like, man, I feel like they have a positive culture.
Who do you want to address that, Adam?
I'm gonna maybe have that go to you, Matt, and then
Okay.
kind of say, you know, hey, you're working with Raul, you're visiting them, you're doing a first interview, and what are the, you know, 3 or 4 things that, like, if you hear them say, like, you're leaving that meeting and go, wow, these guys are crushing it. You know, this is a positive safety culture.
Yeah, the challenge obviously is to make sure that we prove that, right? And it gets back to what I talked about earlier, is making sure we get all the appropriate information, all the documentation. You know, it's my job as a lawyer to make sure that Raul becomes as sophisticated as possible relative to the legal process, to make sure that we accumulate, gather, preserve all of the you know, relevant documents and data. That's going to be important in defending the case. So, you know, that would be the first thing. Obviously, you know, to me, it's very important to get to know, you know, someone like Raul and others at the company. Obviously, we can do, you know, virtual meetings, but eventually, I think it's very important to have in-person meetings. The other thing is I'm very big on developing a rapport with the driver. It's extremely important to me. I mean, to me, that ultimately leads to really good outcomes. You know, because, you know, I'll go to my grave saying that, you know, that preparing a truck driver for a deposition is one of the most difficult tasks that you can have as any lawyer, because the truck driver many times is, you know, is completely unfamiliar with the legal process, and they don't really understand what's going to be coming at them. You're talking about the reptile, and it's completely foreign. And so the better and stronger the relationship you have with the driver, which means trust, the more they're going to work with you and be willing to spend the time with you that's necessary to actually do well at deposition. So to me, those, you know, there's more people, there's the what I'll call the technical side of the equation. So we, you know, we develop our narrative well, we get all the documents that we potentially need early on, which is extremely important, not down the road. Those documents become harder to find down the road. And then we also develop those relationships. And then those relationships, you know, I always, you know, a big believer that I want those relationships to, you know, transcend that actual case when the case ends, because it's so important to have that meaningful time with these people, so that what you're ultimately doing is creating a great outcome.
That's great. So I think we're gonna transition to, you know, it feels like we've only been talking for 5 minutes, but it's been 10 times that. There is one question on here that I do want to bring up. We did have a post from an anonymous attendee that they recognize that they've been doing the same type of activity for 7 years, and they're giving high fives to everyone that's catching up with them. But the first question that I see here, what about the use of properly designed recognition rewards program that regularly engage drivers in a positive way? Raul, maybe I'm going to lean into you to kind of showcase, what does that feel like on a day by day, week, month, quarterly basis? What is the cadence that has really propelled your team to win all the shine behind your left shoulder there?
Sure. So no, I do agree with that. It is important to continually involve and engage your drivers in a positive way. A number of ways that we've done that, and this just continues to get, over time. It's totally different. The program we have now in place versus a year ago is completely different. One of the more recent ones was we were giving away gift cards just for regular pre-trip inspections and or passing of safety checks at our terminal. So we'd approach the driver, we'd talk to them, we'd meet and greet them. We had a small checklist of things that they would have to answer for easy stuff like, do you have no violations on your logs? Do you have all of your required documents? Do you know how to access them? We would also check their ABS light with them, looking for emergency equipment, that kind of stuff. And so long as they checked all that, we would just give them stuff like a gift card. But some of the other things, the leaderboards, the shout outs, the most improved driver score, the top 20, top 10s, we've done a lot of those types of programs in addition to the million mile programs or just the green zone score.
Yeah, and so there's a follow-up question here, and I do appreciate it from, again, an anonymous attendee, which is great. How specifically do you leverage the driver app piece mentioned on earlier slides to present and encourage a positive safety culture? So, are there good guidelines or, recommended practices that you share with the driver, how to interpret the information? How is that, maybe paint a picture of the current state of the mobile app and drivers being able to use it to, see their progress. And
sorry, Adam, was that a question for me?
I'm gonna send that to you, Raul, again. Yeah.
Okay, sure.
So you're the star here in the Q&A.
Okay, sure. So to start, any driver that hires on with our place at our place during our orientation, we do bring them in, and there's a series of applications that they'll download. But this is the first, and this is the start. This is where we start to build that. Let's get you enrolled in here. Let me show you how it works. Let me manipulate. This is where you check this score. Also, we'll have follow-up discussions afterwards, right? Because they don't have a score necessarily when they first start during orientation. So we follow up with them. Okay, now that you have some driving data, do you understand and know how to interpret this? And where are the areas that you're excelling at? And where could you learn to get, or where could we get better from? So I think that's one way of doing it. We do a lot of internal company newsletters, whether it's memos, whether it's direct emails, just news blasts to our fleet, mostly encouraging them to download the app and reach out if they have any questions, or check out this feature within the app to know where you're doing great. And they love that instant feedback.
So I think that the next question here is, did the company work a bonus program around the safety features of Netradyne or work into a current program? Adam Lang, I might draw upon your history about, how your past career might have addressed this. Then I think we got one more question, and I think we're going to close it out for the day.
Yeah, so what I'll do is I'll use a combination of what I did in the past plus the great ideas I've heard. So to answer that, you can do it both ways. You could have a standalone program that relied and hinged upon the Netradyne scoring system, and say you want to pay a certain dollar amount per week, per month, per quarter, where the driver score is at or above a certain level. Or perhaps you give them a kicker to recognize certain milestone achievements like improvement, making sure that they're maintaining a good fleet average and that you're above that, but we want you higher than the fleet average to obtain this next level of reward. The other way I've seen this used, and I got to tell you, I'm a big fan, This ties back to safety incentives of the past, but they're relevant. So safety programs and safety recognition in the past was always for a lack of something, a lack of preventable accident involvement, a lack of tickets, a lack of violations on an inspection, a lack of things, right? So I like looking at that and maintaining that safe, risk-free career as a driver in combination with the green zone score or with lack of a certain amount of alerts or like specifically distracted driving and things like that. So you could mold something to say, okay, the driver didn't have any preventable accidents during this time frame, plus their score was at or above this level. So you'd give them a monetary award for lack of accidents, lack of tickets, and then maybe a multiplier for a good green zone score. So instead of getting $500, you're going to pay them 1.5 times that amount because they also had a certain green zone score, or maybe 2 times that amount. Or for a driver that gets discouraged because they have one preventable accident, and let's be real here for a moment. Let's say somebody curbs a tire. It's an honest mistake. They didn't mean to do it. They only damage physical property, but they still have a great green zone score. You don't want them to lose the whole works, right? So maybe you say, okay, that quarter you get 75% of your bonus because your green zone score saved you in that regard, but you had that one preventable whoopsie that cost the company, $500 in road maintenance fees and a new tire. And so you've got to have some accountability on that and some skin in the game there. But I feel like in concert, Green Zone with other programs works very well, whether it's a multiplier, a milestone achievement, weekly or monthly drawings. You kind of choose your own adventure there. I've got a lot of ideas on it if anyone wants to talk to me offline.
Yeah, so no, thank you, Adam, and I think that's great. And Raul and Matt, thank you very much. There was one last question on here that talked about some of the taxation around bonus programs. Again, neither are we offering, I call it firm legal advice or financial or accounting advice. We all have our opinions. Matt is probably the best suited to engage directly for legal advice. I would suggest if you have come up with a monetary compensation program for bonusing your drivers for safety and recognition, absolutely lean into that hard. 2, if you need to figure out how to make it work from a compensation taxation standpoint, either your CPA or CFO are probably the best resources to kind of talk there. So with that, I'm going to end the podcast and thank everyone so much for attending. I know that Truckload TCA has all the framework in place for making sure that people get copies of the presentation or can reach out to us outside of the conversation. So thank you for spending the time with us.
Thank you, Raul, Matt, Adam Kahn, Adam Lang for a great session. For our attendees, when the webinar closes, you will be redirected to an online survey. We ask that you take a moment to fill it out. This concludes the webinar, and I'd like to wish everyone a wonderful afternoon.